In the Left Behind series, the prophecies of Revelation are presented as a riddle that needs to be deciphered, much like American Treasure or The Secret. But how do you do that in advance? How do you solve the great riddle with enough confidence that you know how to, for example, adjust your 401k? In my series on breaking down the debate between atheist Stephen Woodford and Christian thinker Jonathan Pageau, I made the repeated claim that as society continues to crumble all around us, old-school atheism is falling apart. And so the debates that they're having with religious scholars have changed dramatically just in the last few years. And as I keep saying, worldviews make predictions. All of them. I originally thought about doing this as a comparison between the prophecies, so the predictions of the book of Revelation, compared to the predictions of the future made by an atheist thinker like Sam Harris here. Maybe I will someday, but for now it just seems too stilted. Harris's original thoughts versus me interpreting 2,000-year-old thoughts. A bit of apples and oranges. Nevertheless, Harris has expressed some of the same disillusionment as a lot of atheists in recent years. Because the way they thought things were going to go, as religion declined, and how much better society was going to be, well, it's kind of going the opposite way. But rather than just dunking on naive humanist thinking, I thought a more apt comparison would be to compare the prophecies of Revelation with the prophecies of somebody like this guy, Michael of Notre Dame, Latinized as Nostradamus. Nostradamus lived in France in the 1500s. He became famous for writing a series of short, fortune cookie-like prophecies that people up to the modern day have been remarkably accurate. But the first thing to realize is that Nostradamus didn't consider what he was doing miraculous. His book was termed an almanac because, just like the Farmer's Almanac, it wasn't meant to be divine revelation. It was meant to be reasonable extrapolation based on cues found in nature. And for Nostradamus, that meant astrology. He didn't consider himself a sorcerer. He considered himself a kind of scientist. The signs were present in nature, in the order of the stars, and he thought that he had the formula to tease out the meaning and tell us what those signs meant. He wasn't the only one doing this sort of thing at the time, but the vague nature of his quatrain-style poems made them fun riddles for people to try and puzzle out. And part of their appeal was certainly the topic, which was, generally, the end of the world. And just like with part of the appeal of the book of Revelation, well, people found a certain voyeuristic thrill in thinking about future calamities. But the art of interpretation concerning Nostradamus' work is all about hindsight, like this one that's now being attributed to coronavirus. Okay, my question is this. Even if somehow the position of the stars as seen by an astrologer in the 1500s pointed just directly to the emergence of the coronavirus in 2020, how could anyone have ever known it was coming before it happened just by reading that poem? They couldn't. It's too vague. Which is why no one ever used it to plan their germ-free survival shelters in 2019. Now, only after the fact does this poem get attached to the event. What about this one? Attributed to the Great Fire of London in 1666. Just one problem, besides the fact that 66 probably refers to 1566 after the book came out. But ignoring that, let's say that you're living in London in 1665. Even if you believe that that poem referred to your city next year, you would still conclude from the opening and closing line that it was referring to people being burned at the stake for going against the church. You would think, you know what? Next year, I'm not going to say anything bad about the church for a whole year. Imagine your surprise when you woke up one day and it was the whole city, not just some so-called heretics, that was on fire. And they're all like that. Even the one that gets attributed to Hitler, it says Histor, which was the region of the lower Danube River. Could mean all sorts of things. Okay, now compare to the book of Revelations. Plenty of that's open to interpretation too. I'll be the first one to admit. It's not like it said that 2020 was going to be a lousy year, but then that's not what it does. Now, unlike with Nostradamus' stuff, the prophecies of Revelation are clearly meant to be, just as the name implies, revelatory. Visions of the future given by an all-powerful being who doesn't get things wrong. And the theme, unlike with Nostradamus, is not the end of the world. No, we get the theme in chapter 5, when the writer of Revelation describes a scene of all creation bowing down to Jesus. This, in and of itself was an interesting prophecy, since at the time it was written, Christianity was still just a tiny sect on the fringes of Judaism. But never mind, I covered that in the last of my debate critique videos. Let's get to the specifics of the Revelation prophecies, starting with the trumpets. Now, the first reaction to something like the trumpet prophecies is to say, wow, that's really vague, just like the Nostradamus stuff. I mean, why not just speak plainly? But if it's going to be truly evaluated, it has to be evaluated on the basis of what it's claiming. Now, in video number 2 of this series, we looked at the first prophecy used in the Left Behind series. It comes from Daniel chapter 9, and it refers to a passage where the angel Gabriel comes to Daniel and basically says, I know you're in exile in Persia, and you're praying for your people to get back to Israel. They will, but I think you should know what happens after they get back. It's not all fun and games. And the question becomes, what if this kind of verbiage is the only way to accurately convey the true meaning of the text? Let me explain. Remember that they were dealing with very simple ancient languages. Conveying hypothetical future events, let alone themes, could not have been easy. And what is our theme here? Well, based on our everything bowing down to Christ vision, it would have to be that all human beliefs, all human endeavors outside of Christ and his teachings will inevitably be proven false. All of it blowing up in some way. And remember here too, for any of these prophecies to have any relevance, the underlying prophecy that Christ's teaching would alter the course of world events, made at a time when Christianity was just a tiny sect, was already an amazingly accurate prophecy. As for the trumpets themselves, prior to World War I, nothing at all of human experience would fit this passage of flaming objects of some kind, falling out of the sky and burning up all the grass, creating a, no man's land. Now, just a quick caveat. Daniel may have received a visit from the angel Gabriel, but I certainly have not. I can't claim to know this interpretation for certain. This is a thought experiment. Can it be done? Can we connect these prophecies to actual events in both content and theme? And if so, is there a point where we can start to do it in advance? So, did World War I fit this mold with the first trumpet? Did it ever? You see, the whole reason that we started having world wars was because of the humanist revolution of the 1800s. Mankind began to think of itself as possessing intrinsic goodness, which was not something widely believed prior to that time. Believe in an inherent goodness of humanity, and you lose your general suspicion of other people and other countries. The 1800s brought on an immense web of alliances that basically meant if one country goes to war, they all go to war. So in 1914, a little dust-up between Austria and Serbia, something that would have had a relatively small body count in times past, wound up leading to 40 million deaths. So that fits. And it even gets us a time frame and fleshes out the theme a little more, that being attempts to create a paradise, a utopia, heaven, whatever. But what about the second trumpet? Anything that fits our theme of false hopes for that one? Oh yeah. You see, after the First and Second World Wars, the belief that mankind was inherently good and was on its way to an earthly utopia took a bit of a hit, but just a bit of one. Flower power. The hippies. So mankind couldn't do it all by itself, okay. But that just meant that we'd have to get in touch with our loving Earth Mother and do it as a cooperative. To the ancients, the symbol of the earth and its infinite resources was the oceans, the seas. You see, they couldn't get very far on them, or really even wrap their heads around how big they were, so the idea of an infinite earth made sense. As for the mountain, people like the Left Behind guys get this wrong all the time. The text just lists a series of calamities. It doesn't say that they all result from the mountain all aflame striking the water. After all, if something like that happened, we'd care more about what happened to our coastal cities than what happened to our sailing fleet. But okay. Has there been any great mountains burning with fire, striking our oceans that somehow prove that we're not creating a paradise with the help of Mother Earth? Sure. Watch.
She slipped under the waves.
That was the Deepwater Horizon's rig sinking, as it released millions upon millions of barrels of oil into the ocean. And that wasn't even the worst one to have happened in the Gulf of Mexico. Red tides, overfishing creating dead zones, and shipping accidents, all leading to another pushback. No, the Earth isn't infinite. We're destroying that just like we destroy everything else. Mother Earth isn't our savior, she's our next victim. Next up, we're told that something falls from the sky and makes the waters bitter, killing many. This thing has a specific name. Its name is Wormwood. Alright, what replaced the Christianized world's hope for the future after the hippie movement? That would be the Apollo space program and the dawn of the computer age, the age of science. Maybe the Earth won't save us, but technology will. Heck, we can leave the planet and move out into the stars if we have to. Then the power plant in the city of Wormwood exploded, belching toxic waste into the atmosphere and killing, we still don't know how many. And the idea of us doing anything with science besides just killing ourselves with it took a major hit. What? You never heard of this one? Yes, you have. It's just that biblical scholarship on this side of the pond is so lazy and American-centered that hardly anyone bothered to translate the word. Plus, the Slavonic has undergone a bit of a shift over the centuries. Basically, you just got to change the E to an O to be current. But if that's your counter-argument, notice again, we got another example that fits the text perfectly. No, science isn't going to save us. We take the atom, we make atom bombs. We take it and things like it, and we let it explode and nearly hit a water pocket below it that would have effectively ended life as we know it on the northern hemisphere of our planet. 4? I did a whole series on 4. It has a literal fulfillment with all the pollution that we put in the air, but it also fits the theme, again, perfectly. You see, the last half of the 20th century saw an explosion in the entertainment industry, thanks to the technology giving us so much free time that we all got bored. And as we got far enough away from world wars and cold wars, we suddenly decided that actors and athletes were the most important people on this planet. Stars were always a symbol of human creativity. Heck, maybe our boundless creativity could save us. But as we become increasingly materialistic, that creativity is vanishing. More and more, all we can do is imitate. The 5th, just in time for the me generation, the age of self-help. Lots of imagery. Hair of a woman, breastplate of iron, as in over the heart, on and on. All of it images used elsewhere in Hebrew teaching, all of it leading to an image of a person mentally corrupted, mentally ill. I did a video series on this too. Mental illness was awfully uncommon prior to the Industrial Revolution, so much so that there wasn't even a language for our writer of Revelation to describe it. We'll see here in the coming videos the pains he has to go to just to say a world full of narcissists. As for putting a human face on the type of animal to show a mental state, well, that was common in the ancient world. The Egyptians did it, so did the Greeks. They mostly put their faces on birds. Here, we put it on locusts, as in a world of mindless consumers. Yep, still on topic. And that last one. Those colors are the colors of the outside of the robes of Hebrew priests. This is an army, but it's an army of priests, like some crazy ideology has become its own religion and leads to the bowl judgments, the final dark age of humanity. And the 7th trumpet, which signals the end of the world. Gee, I wonder if we have any candidates for that. So, not like Nostradamus, this actually fits both in content and theme. As for usefulness, its primary message is not to get caught up in any of the false hopes. I think there's value in that, but you decide. As for when the army of priests brings on the final dark age thing, that one gets real specific. And that's where we can start using it to prepare in advance. I'll do a specific video on it later. For now, just realize that it'll be after the Euphrates River goes dry. Another specific statement, and something the ancients could hardly have imagined, considering the size of the Euphrates. As for now, we can imagine it. This is David Reichert from The Bunker. Click like and subscribe and click the notification bell and we'll try and keep the videos coming. Also, see the link below to order book 1 of the Holocaust Engine series, our pandemic post-apocalyptic horror that won the Pinnacle Award for the best science fiction novel of 2020.